Welcome to the Assembly of Silence Radio Hour.
In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome a new guest to the show. I actually met this gentleman on social media. And I've been listening a lot lately to just what a poisonous environment social media is. So it's really wonderful to know that there's still an exception possible. He and I had a very brief interaction, and I thought it was interesting enough, so I just invited him to the show. And he said, sure, would love to be on the show. And so I invite you to sit back and take a listen as I have a conversation with Nadeem Gibran Salaam. Here we are. I'm really glad that this is happening.
Same. I'm going to silence my unreliable technology.
Which is the nature of all technology right now, it seems.
If it's made by man, it's never going to be perfect, you know?
Absolutely.
As much as it's deceiving, you know, because technology is just like a chimera. It's just so powerful, and like it's like I see it as like the mythological waters, you know, of the past, where you would look into the water and it would be filled with allusions to ancient man, just going with something heady.
Yeah, let's jump right in.
I don't know if you'd like to do any formalities of staying high.
I usually don't, actually, so that's perfect. We're hoping to get Starlink. Speaking of technology, I just put a deposit down on Starlink.
Well, I'm not too familiar with that is.
Oh, that's one of Elon Musk's many ventures. He's basically surrounding the globe with satellites to provide internet to the entire world. And apparently it's very high speed. And although I have a lot of misgivings about the idea of having thousands of satellites stringing the globe in order to do internet, I'm not going to be able to stop that no matter what I do. And there's already thousands of satellites up there. So I hear it's great, and we have really crappy internet out here, so I'm somewhat excited about it because I do a fair amount of stuff online, and it would be great to not have these technical problems, although I'm sure that there will be other problems that will sneak in. You still with me?
Yeah, I think you froze up just now.
Yeah, we could turn off the video because it's going to be of limited entertainment value to just see a freeze frame.
Am I still freezing?
Yeah, it's just been the same freeze frame now.
Oh, wow.
Since I first mentioned it. So
okay, yeah. I'll click stop video.
Yep, I'm going to do the same here. Okay. So yeah, you started talking about the basic properties of technology, that there's a kind of a fundamental unreliability, or at least imperfection that will always creep into our technical aspirations. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to consider, because not only are we placing so much hope in the technology, but we've gotten to a point now where we really depend upon it. So in many respects, I think a lot of people see, they believe that the only way out of the various challenges that are posed is to go full steam into all the possible technical solutions.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that the technology that we have now, I would call it the post-computer era of technology, is no different than, a plow is to a farmer going back maybe however long. But there's a massive difference, which is the plow is just an object. It's just a tool that does what it's designed for. There's like you could call it a dumb technology. And I think the computer era, it's almost like this is the first technology that has ever looked back at us. So in some ways you could see it as like the birth of a new creature. I think the psychologist Carl Jung described when locomotives were being invented that it's like man was creating his own animated creatures. They're almost like beasts, metal beasts that come out of our imagination. And there's this, there's obviously this natural element to technology that's very lifelike. But I would say the computer and beyond, with artificial intelligence, is the perfection, or as close to perfection, of that original creation of something looking back at us.
Well, I think that some of the people who were involved in the earliest development of computer technology saw from that very, very early point that the fundamental utility of the computer would be to control the human being. So I think it was Alan Turing who was responsible for some of the basic conceptual framework within which the computer was developed. And he recognized, as he was working on, I think, the machine to break the Enigma code during World War II, that this was a device that would be used for the control of human populations, which, during the world wars, I think everyone became aware that if we didn't get human behavior under control, we were in serious trouble. So, as the military technology developed, it became ever more destructive and threatening to a decent way of life. The recognition was that, well, we had better change the way that human beings tend to behave. Otherwise, we're doomed.
Yeah, for sure. There's actually a really great new movie that came out, I think last year, which seems like not really a real year. So from now on, I just refer to 2020 as the lost year in a lot of sense for, just the collective. It also depends on what you did with that time, right? Which we can get into in a short moment.
Yeah, another way of looking at it is that, 2020 was when things got real. In some respects, you could say that in actuality, we've been living in a delusional dream, and 2020 was the wake-up call.
Absolutely, yeah. But this discussion of technology is definitely reminding me of this new movie. It's called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Of course, it's one of my favorite films of all time. It's actually not a new movie. It was made maybe 10 years ago.
Really?
Although Adam Curtis did just release a new movie, which is called Can't Get You Out of My Head, which I highly recommend. It may not be quite as concise
cerebral
and incisive.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God. All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. We could talk about that for 5 hours and we'd only be scratching the surface.
Well, yeah, I guess it was a mistake on iTunes or wherever I think I rented to see it. It says 2020, but yeah, Adam Curtis is, he's done a really good job with that film. And I didn't watch all of it, but I got through enough where it definitely seemed to resonate with me on a deep level because of things that I think of. So, I'm not always really as worried about technology in the sense of the fear of the 60s when, in the 50s, when people were really worried about atomic bombs and that kind of thing. To me, I see it as more of a very slow lullaby, especially with social media. Seems to have this really strange effect on society. Like it's definitely destabilized society to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the longer you use, it's almost like going down a rabbit hole. And I know in a lot of great mythology, there's like a room of mirrors, where you see many versions of you, and after a while, the longer you're there, you're really not sure what was the original image. There's this potential, I think, especially if that's all you've known, is this type of doorway into the fractured images of yourself that you could get lost. And, imagine being in a fun house for enough time and you drop acid, you might forget which one was the first one, the first reflection.
Yeah. It stops being fun after a while.
Yeah, it seems disorienting, I think, for certain age groups. And I don't know if you follow the work of Jonathan Haidt, and people have really kind of given that a good examination, but they speak in depth about, social media having this seems like negative effect on younger people. There's a huge increase in self-harm, depression, suicide at levels we've never seen for people that young, when you're supposed to be filled with the most hope, in your life.
Yep.
Are these topics, these topics that interest you, that you've thought about a lot in your personal life?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're touching on some very deep themes here, and I think at a time when people are kind of obsessed with identity, it kind of stands to reason that we would have a very difficult time figuring out what identity is. Yeah, I think on some level you could say that that's an overall pattern. Like prior to the identity, you had this individualism, which in many respects is a similar type of phenomena. I think that Curtis talks about that, the age of the individual. The Century of the Self is another one of his documentaries that kind of examines how Freudian thinking was integrated into government and business in an effort to control mass behavior. A super interesting one. I mean, basically all of Adam Curtis's films are well worth watching and meditating on. I think it's also worth mentioning that as wonderful and as deep as his work is, there is a way in which I have to keep in mind that he's worked for the BBC, and that you don't work for the BBC without kind of playing by a certain set of rules. So there are some things in some of the films where I feel like maybe he's kind of shading things in a certain way, but if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, it's remarkable how much it is that he offers in terms of a glimpse into the big patterns that are happening within history and the big changes, and doing so in a way where it's kind of, you feel the force of history moving things, and not so much like trying to blame individuals. He tells individual stories of people who have strengths and weaknesses and what have you, but the narrative is one of kind of trying to understand and fit together all these pieces so you can see that the arc of history has this movement to it, and we're all kind of wrapped up in it. That's what I really admire about his commentary, and just the opportunity to be able to see all that archival footage is incredible.
Yeah, for sure. He's, when you make a film like that, I think of all the work that we don't see. We see a final product, but the amount of work that it takes to research something like that, and try to be true to the form. Any good filmmaker should be truthful. I think that's what lasts. In art, making a documentary is part journalism, part art, and historian. So there's many components that go into something like that. So I definitely have respect for people who do that.
Absolutely. It's interesting, like you mentioned, that it should be truthful. And I think it's a tragedy. Like the tragedy of our time is that people have forgotten that truth was the highest aspiration of art. And it's so rare now to see art with any concern for the truth built into it.
Yeah, that's a complex one, especially now. It's a really complex one, what you just said, because there's so many components that go into culture, the current culture too, that, it's like, where do you begin with trying to unpack it? But certain like viewpoints that I've had about it are, it's really hard to have a culture of honesty. And when you have an ought to think as culture, and you have a lot of moral type of posturing going on, because it's like in some, and that's also a multivariate complex perspective too, because I don't want to generalize with what types of people are capable of doing that, because human nature is so easily swayed and, by intentions that seem to be the good intention. But, there's a great quote, I'm sure you've heard, that the line between good and evil strikes between the heart of every man. I think it was Solzhenitsyn who said that originally, who survived the gulags in Russia. And I think that a lot of identity and things like that, they're kind of related. It's the focus on identity is, I think, one part because you have the first generation to ever grow up on intelligent software that it almost participates with your consciousness. I grew up I was born in 1984. For obviously people listening who don't know me, don't know much about me. So I'm kind of in I would say it was closer to the Gen X generation. I had an older brother and sister, and they had a huge influence on me because they were old enough to be in the culture of their time. So even though I really came to age in the late 80s and early 90s, I was still really connected to a previous life before intelligent technology. And let's just say, to give perspective, Facebook and MySpace were invented after I graduated high school. So I got to live an entire lifetime of learning who I am. And I would just want to say something about learning who you are, because that's also very important. A large part of that is being wrong, learning, like, identity isn't, and this is something that Jordan Peterson has expressed recently, that, a big part of identity is being wrong, because identity isn't fully your own, right? You can't just invent an identity like, I am the world's greatest shaman philosopher. Great. Wow. Okay. You can't pat yourself on the back that hard. It takes people to participate in shaping your identity, maybe course correcting you, maybe, exposing you to your own humbleness, in some ways, because, to think that we fully know ourselves, it's a very confident, maybe overconfident position to have.
Yeah, I think it's on some elemental level, philosophically impossible to know one's true identity. I imagine that in the past, it was at times easier to have a more solid sense of identity. And part of what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was. I don't know if it was ever easier in the past or something. I think it's always been difficult. I think it's been very, very hard. And for that reason, maybe people pass on a sense of duty to people to understand that it is difficult and it takes a lot of work and patience. And you're always learning about, parts of yourself. And the most important part of that is through relationship, through communication, through like a type of mirroring. You have to have someone mirror to you your behavior and tendencies, so you can then actually learn about them. It's very easy to get defensive about that.
I would push back on that a little bit, because it seems to me that in the past there were periods of time where there was a degree of stability, and there would be a kind of a passing of a way of life from generation to generation with a fair amount of continuity. So if you were born into a family of blacksmiths, then you were going to be a blacksmith, probably, and that, farmers would be farmers. And so it was a way of life. And so you're integrated into a kind of pattern of cultural behavior. And it just felt incredibly natural. It's not until someone calls it into question or some kind of disruption occurs that one begins to wonder who the heck you are. So it's kind of like taken out of the context of whatever would be a rooted life in a very particular way of doing things. That's when the question of identity arises. Otherwise, I think there are some people who never even doubted for a moment or ever had any kind of even a sense that another identity would be possible. They may know that there are other people doing other things, but, this is what we do. So, we've lost that, and for a variety of different reasons, and perhaps to some extent on purpose. You can make the case that part of the whole plan in trying to control large numbers of people was to dislocate them from context and to place them into, the context of no context, which is another book that's kind of an interesting touchstone to get a sense of what has happened to the world, where it's very difficult to have a sense of belonging for any significant period of time. People move from one location to another, one job to another, one profession to another. They have different types of friends, and it's difficult to form a very deep understanding for each other.
Well, yeah, I don't know if we're disagreeing exactly. I guess I was trying to say that the self-illusion has always been there. We've always had to work within that as much as, we've had to, before our brains grew large enough that, we were just dealing with hunger, right? Like these kinds of the base biological drives. Our brains grew massively, and a large part of our focus has been our minds. And I just think self-illusion has always been there. But yes, what you're saying is like a cultural construct, like the construct of reality. I see every time period as having its own psychological construct, and you're almost working within those dynamics. And the time period you speak about, kind of tradesmen, yeah, I see that as when culture is mirroring biology, it's mirroring human nature, and it's benefiting it to some degree more than, let's say, the modern era, in some ways, which, like you said, kind of works against your nature, works against, I guess, just allowing your consciousness to have some sort of flexibility to understand itself, which was, I think, definitely, I mean, it's always been hard though, even in the past, but I would say we're not making it any easier.
Yeah.
It's like taking something infinitely complex and making it more complex, which is just, it's abstraction. And the digital world is abstraction. It's kind of like the infinite world of just endless numbers. And it's interesting. I have yet to fully understand it. Obviously, it's whether it would be too finite for me to say that it's worse, or it's just a transition into something unknown, that likely mean you will never see. So, well,
I think that if I hear what you're saying correctly, then we do basically agree. And you could say that the fundamental issue of identity is always philosophically at question. And that's kind of just the nature of existence. And that's maybe brought to highlight in moments of crisis, and that the present technology is leveraging that basic fact against us on some level. That it takes this question that no one can really fully resolve and brings it to the forefront in everyone's mind as we're all attempting to figure out who we are and what the hell it is we're doing here.
Yeah, I think, when you demand that people are perfect, and, which is, you could argue that people are saying that, it's important to also, I guess, be a little bit objective about that. Are people demanding people are perfect, or just not do bad things and say bad things? I guess that's the counter argument is, well, we're just asking people to be better, and we're not asking people to be perfect. But I would say the objective aha moment is the lack of redemption, because if you're really trying to make people better, then you have to allow them to be redeemed. That's just how the process works.
Right.
And I don't know about your religious background or things like that, but I grew up Islamic, and I left Islam as a child and went into Buddhism. It was really, really came to me at the right time. And I was just obsessed with reading about Buddhism and a lot of, East Asian philosophies. And that definitely informs my ideas of redemption. So I do think it's incredibly ancient. It's something to be so cavalier about. It would be wrong. I think redemption is integral to the human spirit, and it's something profound, and it looks and feels a way that vibrates with us in a way that we know it when it happens and that it's important. It's primal to the human experience. And I definitely see a lack of redemption. It's very obvious to see how people who've said or done things that when they're younger are sort of canceled, right? That is the language of the time. They're canceled. It's almost like a type of gulag system in a way. You're banished.
Yeah.
So in that way, there is no redemption is my general point.
Well, it seems that, holding people to impossible standards is something that has been accumulating over the course of time. When you think about the standards of so-called beauty, I will use the air quotes around the word beauty.
You said it's increasing?
Yeah, I think so. The impossible standards. And that's kind of a trick. It's a way of creating a kind of fear, I think, is probably the primary response, particularly when people's livelihoods are being cut out from underneath them as a result of saying the wrong word. I think that's, we're definitely into Orwellian territory here.
Right.
And it's profound that this would happen here in this country that has for so long celebrated its dedication to freedom, and even more recently to so-called tolerance and fairness, and has kind of thumped its chest to the rest of the world, talking about how wonderful we are here. And somehow or another, this is what's ended up happening. There seems to be kind of the consequence of hubris visits all of us, whether we were approving of it as it progressed or not. The sins of the father are visited upon all the sons.
Yeah, which is such a tragedy, right? To be punished for the sins of, the people that we stand above, ground,
Mm-hmm.
That's, it hurts. It makes me definitely sensitive to hear and see when people do that, because I know I'm a self-reflective person, and I know that I am not perfect. I know that I, in my younger times, have made serious mistakes, and mistakes that I would never change if I had the chance to, because I did the work to realize how being in certain places at the right time with the wrong crowd, even, it eventually leads you to some sort of road in the hero's journey of correcting that mistake. Like to me, every action has a seed.
Yeah, that's what life is. How can you know life without having made mistakes? I've made a lot of mistakes, and part of me really wishes that I could change some of the things, but I hear what you're saying. The terrible things that end up happening and the bad decisions that we make are definitely a huge part of the learning process. Although it has to be said that it seems like there are some people who don't learn. And so, it's an opportunity to learn, but it's not necessarily going to happen. And a lot of the decisions that have led to the situation that we're presently confronted with are made by a very small number of people, which is the other thing that's just outrageously kind of disgusting and unfair about the situation. So many of the decisions that have led things to the point that we're at in this country, it was really just a small number of people who made these decisions. And this is supposedly a democracy. So,
Yeah, there's I hear a lot of language when people say this is a democracy. I think people like I don't know. It depends on your ideology, right?
Yeah, I mean, and definition, I guess.
I see myself as ideological, so I tend to be a watcher and observer. And, I obviously growing up, I grew up in New York. So the chances of being a conservative in New York are like, I don't know, finding a living dinosaur,
That's funny.
It's just people would stop and stare and scream and run. But I grew up very liberal, though, and obviously a Democratic voter. But it's really interesting. I think there's certain time periods and things that happen where the collective, moves in a direction that it's outside your control. Like you mentioned with Elon Musk and technology earlier. Some things are out of your control, and you're just a participator in making free, choices to some degree within an algorithm of reality.
Yeah, like free choices within a constrained set of circumstances.
Yeah, well, you're always given a certain amount of choices, and that can abstract you in a whole new direction, and which seems like infinity. Like you'll never get to live out every life and just every choice of. So it's not something small. It's obviously, to me, it's like infinity. But yeah, you have a certain amount of choices. But I was saying about politics that it's kind of similar. Like it seems like there's this with obviously Donald Trump and that era. It seems to be the end of one era and the beginning and welcoming of a whole new direction of society. And as much as we're kind of fighting to keep norms that make sense, and there's this kind of turmoil, and similar turmoils come and go every however many years and decades, 100 years, right? 100-year events that change the course of history, boiled down to that 1 year. And I think we just went through that between chaotic politics in America and COVID.
Yeah,
we've definitely entered a transition that we are participating with rather than getting to opt out if we wanted to. Everyone's in right now.
So at this point, do you identify as on the political spectrum one way or another, or are you sort of in a no man's land?
I think there's a new saying that's going around called politically homeless.
Yeah.
Yeah, shout out to whoever invented that, because I think there's many people who feel that way, whether they were leftists aligned with Bernie or kind of more politically tokenized and into the party line. I know a lot of people have left the Democratic Party, which I'm actually officially unregistered as of last week. So I am literally politically homeless now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been politically homeless most of my life. I'm a fair amount older than you. I was born in the 60s, and
well, you don't look it.
Well, I feel it. But thank you, sir.
For people who, may not be any video components, so the audience can't stroke your ego here either.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry about that.
Well, they rarely do that anyway, and hopefully they'll continue to not do that, because that would be a terrible thing if my ego actually saw some kind of positive reinforcement. I think I'd probably abandon the whole project. But yeah, it's occurred to me pretty early on that neither flavors, this sort of duopoly system was a fraud, and it's been incredibly difficult to talk about, maintaining connections with people and that sort of thing. If there's any political discussion, a lot of my friendships have been really sorely tested by my refusal to toe the party line. And most of them, of course, because I came from New York, were Democrats. I have now, having left the East Coast and experienced a wide range of things that were way outside of what typically happens on the East Coast. I have some friends who are far more conservative leaning, some of whom were Trump supporters, and who I actually find in general that the conservative crowd is more willing to engage on things than the liberal crowd.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting. Although I still disagree with many of their positions, I do admire the fact that at least they're willing to have a conversation about it. But I think that now it's gotten so polarized and so tendentious, and just, and it seems like the conversations never really lead anywhere. People have really kind of hunkered down into their foxholes and don't want to budge. And I wonder to what extent now, those of us who are politically homeless make up perhaps a majority. You know, I think that's in some respects what Brett Weinstein has been suggesting in his, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his movement, the effort to bring together the two parties with kind of a third party. It's an interesting little trick he was trying to do. He called Unity 2020. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. And, you know, it could have worked, but you could tell even the people who they had picked to be part of this movement were somewhat reluctant, you know, like, it's just so difficult to operate outside of the system because the system is incredibly powerful, even though it's on the wane and even though it's incredibly corrupt and really doesn't do the people any good anymore, as far as I can tell. There's still a lot of power in it, and they're unafraid to use methods that anyone with a sense of decency would never do. So it's difficult to compete against people who have those, you know, a willingness to do whatever it takes.
Well, I mean, I think it's no coincidence. Tulsi Gabbard and I believe it's Amish who left their positions, you know, or are going to. I don't know the timeline, but I think it's really hard for good people to get into politics, you know, and it's almost made that way. It would take enough people to really get in together to do something about it. It's really hard because it goes back to a lot of our more psychological combos about learning about yourself and extending to people grace that may not even deserve it. You know, a lot of this takes a lot of strong, like a strong sense of belief and self, and maybe even something beyond. Offer people that kind of courtesy.
Well, this actually gets back to the way that you and I met, which was you had tweeted something. What you said was, if society is determined to make sure only conformists are celebrated, not harassed and bullied, create a culture where the opposite is true. Celebrate and support those who dare to think. And I thought that was really interesting, and replied to it that I said, amen, but some deep problematics there. And then asked if you wanted to be a guest on the podcast.
Right. Sure. Which I'm happy you did, you know, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And, you know, there's something else that came out of that. I think there's a good chance that that Mike McCullough may be a guest sometime in the near future, too. Because I noticed that he not only liked the interaction that you and I had, but decided to subscribe to me on Twitter. So I was like, well, you know, Mike, because I've been following him for many years and have had a number of exchanges with him. He's always really gracious and wonderful. And I imagine you follow him too. And and so I said, hey, you know, if you ever wanted to come on the show too, I would be honored to have you as a guest. And he said, well, let's talk about it in a couple of weeks.
That's
so
awesome.
That was wonderful. Yeah. So I want to thank you for that, because that wouldn't have happened had it not been for our exchange. And but I think that what you were pointing to there is absolutely related to the whole political situation that we find ourselves in right now, because fundamentally we have these two parties that are demanding that everyone kind of step in line. In particular, right now, I think the Democrats are really over the top with that. I mean, in some respects, it looks like they're making moves to try to make it illegal to be someone who's against them. And so this whole thing of conformity, when you have a society that's fragile, it seems like quite often that's what ends up happening, is that there's an ever greater demand that no one rock the boat at the time when really we need to really be reevaluating what it is that we're doing here and coming up with some new ideas. Because to drill down on doing things the way that have led us to the present situation is pure insanity. I mean, I think that's kind of Einstein's definition of insanity, is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And that's basically what politicians have been doing. They're continually pushing the same policies, and the disastrous results are, I think it's frankly gotten to the point now where it's almost impossible to imagine how this could get turned around in a decent way.
Yeah, I'd like to go back real quick to just talking about this type of because I think it's related to politics, right? Because politics is always, to me, it's just a game of opportunism, and they follow where they think the crowd is going, and then they also use the cultural tide against people, and that's really the definition of propaganda. And if you think about it, it's culture, manipulated culture. But I'd like to just go back real quick and touch on what you said, which was really, kind of I think a part of the heart of this is you were saying that Republicans and, or you could just say conservative leaning tend to at least be down to have like a discussion in 2021. That's what it seems like, which is kind of remarkable because the left has always been this pioneer and champion of open, free intellectual debate. And I think that's important examining. I think it has something to do with the fact that these ideas were once countercultural to the time and the era of when they were largely growing and building in America. And, there's this underdog quality to these ideas. And it was through the successes of making these ideas mainstream that they also went through the same process of anything that becomes mainstream in society, which is a high point and decay. All ideas decay eventually, right? Establishments are formed, and then those establishments get greasy and nasty. And like, it's kind of like with unions. There was a time and era when they really shined when they needed to, and then the times change and they become the establishment. They're still comprised of groups of individuals, and individuals are playing by the same types of rules as groups do, just on a larger level. And one of those rules is self-delusion and wanting power and, all the types of deadly sins that are spoken about in human nature.
Yep.
And then it becomes about how can we benefit our group, and tribalism takes over. And I think that ties in a lot to politics, because politics is mirroring a lot of the culture, and it's also manipulating the culture at the same time. So, I think a solution is to really form avenues like this, right? This type of dialogue we're having for different consciousness to communicate. I always say that respect for different consciousness, right? Like you having your own worldview that's unique, and me having my own that's unique, and both of us interacting, that is the highest sign of liberty, respect for different consciousness. And as long as we cultivate that and we really educate people about propaganda, to me that's a great solution, because eventually politics will be forced in some ways to participate with the culture we're building. There has been times that we've gotten very close to that. And I think there's a reason why, I'm not an expert in it, but I just have to mention like with infiltration, and a lot of that happened in the 60s because people were getting very, very successful at creating different consciousness. But I think the ultimate route towards any of this is cultivating different consciousness. And, just understand that there's a reason why I think Noam Chomsky said this, so I'm really dropping left and right references, so you really know that I mean what I say about being politically homeless. But I think Noam Chomsky mentioned that the debate, right, the rubric of debate is limited, and it's narrowed so that you're only speaking in terms of A or B, right? And that's not a coincidence, I think.
Well, yeah, the conformist point of view would really limit what's on the menu. So it's just, multiple choice of, a handful of things that can be discussed without getting ejected from the stage. But I think that what you point to is actually what I was going to bring up. This question of infiltration is extremely important. And while I completely agree that I think you said it really nicely, that liberty is the recognition of the diversity of consciousness and the willingness to be able to hear those who you disagree with, and just different points of view in general, which is, I think, the step one when it comes to being able to learn. But I think the infiltration has gotten now to the point where, in essence, the infiltration is the platform that we're all using in order to be able to make these connections.
Great point.
So on some level, in the context of understanding that the flow of history from sort of this Adam Curtis, we could say, a sense of the pressure of this new destructive technology, not just nuclear weapons, but biological weapons, and the various types of techniques that have been developed in order to control human behavior for industrial purposes, for espionage purposes, for political purposes. All of that kind of lands us in a reality where fundamentally humanity is being managed and controlled in much the same way that humanity manages and controls crops and farm animals, And so while we're all being monitored, there's to some extent there are some who are looking for signs of innovation and novelty, something that might be useful, and there are others who are looking for things that might be dangerous that they would want to suppress or eliminate. So on some level, we're back in the jungle. It's a dangerous game, and those of us who are interested in participating in it are going to be, taking on a certain amount of risk. It took me quite a while to get to the point where I would be willing to speak freely about things. I had to do a lot of thinking because I recognized that this is a relatively serious thing to do. Although I don't have enough of an audience for it to really matter at this point. That could change, I suppose, although it seems unlikely because, part of the game right now is that the platforms make a decision about whether or not the algorithm is going to favor whatever it is you're doing. And so if there's something that you're doing that they would not want to see spread, they may still find it of interest, but they will probably keep it relatively circumscribed so that there's really not all that much attention given to it. And it's very easy for them to do that. If someone gets a lot of attention, it's very easy for them to shut them down now. And we've seen that happening with alarming frequency nowadays. So, I try to find a way of being able to see things in a light that's as forgiving as possible to the people who I disagree with, and, the people who are running these technology companies and making the decisions that they're making are amongst them. They're kind of like the political class. But I think on some level, given the flow of history, we can see that a species that has so many members and with such a violent history and with relatively slim tolerances in maintaining civilization, there would be increasingly kind of a lack of tolerance and an insistence on people doing things in a particular way, whether it's for the better or not. And there's another frame that I think is worth talking about that's a little bit out there, but I think that there is an evolutionary way of viewing what's going on. And if you look at what happened to the social insects, like the ants and the bees, they had to change their behavior in order to manage large populations. And part of that behavior was you had large numbers of non-reproductive females. You have this kind of endorphin-based economy. You have males suppressed and basically just kind of held as a sperm bank, And so we see some of these similar types of trends because humanity has reached a kind of crisis point in its relationship between, its requirements in order to maintain a population and the environment. And so, the male tendency to want to try to solve problems and, think things through and get to the bottom of it and all that kind of stuff is disruptive to fragile systems that are really struggling to maintain themselves. And I think that's why we're seeing some of this kind of oppressive behavior coming from leadership.
Well, yeah, I think the social media owners, right, like the giants and the owners who run those companies, I think they're making a huge mistake trying to be the arbiters of like morality. And that's the really tricky thing. I just think that I want to say that I'm not sure if it's as innocent as them just being business people, right? Because it's business and politics. The one thing they have in common is, what does the audience want? It's like you're just trying to make sure that the money keeps coming in. So you just follow what the audience wants. And I think I'm not sure if that is the case here, because I know that a large part of these early ventures were created with this type of utopian vision, right? And it's in that utopia type of thinking, I think, where you do get some of the most horrific types of behavior. It's this type of like arrogance that, with a couple of fixes, you can improve people and you can make everything squeaky clean. It reminds me of that the book. Are you thinking of the book that I'm thinking of? I always get the name. I
don't know. Oh, that sounds like All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. There's a fair amount of that, the sort of dismal place that utopian idealism led to is detailed in that documentary. But what's the book you were thinking of?
The Giver.
I don't know it.
It takes place in the near future where it's kind of really eerie, but it's like, imagine if you thought through this time period, right? That we don't know the direction it'll go in, but one of the directions it could go in is like this sci-fi novel called The Giver, where let's say we keep going into abstraction, and it comes a point where, how there's this huge safety culture and this like inability to deal with different consciousness, to feel the friction of having to defend your identity, right? There's this almost wanting to avoid that and have the online world mirror the real world. And we clearly see that it doesn't work, because, even on a psychological level, sure, right? You could say that you do need the challenge to be a full person. Like the challenge is a part of the, becoming whole. And then that's like a Jungian term that Carl Jung would use, is wholeness. Carl Jung said he's not aiming to be a good person. He's aiming to be a whole person. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Well, there's a lot of interesting themes in there. And I thought maybe it would be interesting to discuss how some of this plays. We have actually a number of common interests that I find sort of fascinating. Like, you're a musician, and if I'm not mistaken, you are an electrician. Is that correct?
Yeah. That was just mainly because of COVID. So I'm in the audio world. I've always been in the audio world. I've been obsessed with sound since I was like in the third grade, and I had a tape recorder. And I started recording all sorts of weird abstract stuff. So, audio, I'm a mix engineer. I also have been just filming artists for many, many years. I'm a musician myself. And during COVID, I needed to expand my skills because I realized quickly the arts, the entertainment was the first to go and the last to come back. And that put me in a really difficult situation. Luckily I had a bit of my online part of the business already set up, so I was able to springboard off of that. But getting into audio electric, like it was an expansion of my skills that I've already had. So I'm kind of building gear, whether, analog gear, and designing it. And that company is called Redeemer Electric Labs. So that's a part of my world.
That's wonderful. Send me the link. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, my father was a professional musician, and then he was in the music business too. So he
right on.
Opened a number of record shops that they had, like one of the first chain of record shops in the United States, and did pretty well with that. So I grew up with, music was like the family religion, truly.
What I would have given growing up with a family like yours, but I think it worked out.
Though there were some real downsides to it.
Oh, really?
I'm not saying that I'm not grateful for it. It was great, but part of it was that I placed too much into the musical. I really feel like in order to be a whole person, to be well-rounded, you need to have a wider range of experiences. And I just kind of funneled myself into that for the first 30 some odd years of my life. And it really wasn't a good fit for me. I'm not a musician kind of guy. I love music. I love making music. I think that some of the stuff that I do is worth listening to, but I don't like the music business. I don't like going to clubs. I don't like going on tour. I just don't like the social scene of it. It's not the kind of thing. I'm more philosophically oriented. I have this weird idea that like truth and music should be married to each other, and that just doesn't seem to be part of the show usually. So I end up feeling like, this is really not what I want to put my heart and soul into. So, but I did for a long time. I did the whole do commercial music during the day in order to fund your project that you're doing at night, that whole thing. And I did a bunch of work in music technology. And then eventually I got interested in Eastern philosophy as well. I started studying Tai and Qigong. And I realized that I was kind of hating the musical world. So I left the city. I lived in New York as well, and started just teaching little Tai Chi classes. And then when I met my wife, I moved out from the East Coast, which I never thought I would do. I moved to Oregon and started doing odd jobs. So I started learning like all kinds of stuff, from the stuff you do around a house to doing landscaping and forestry work. And I joined the fire department, and just kind of like realized there's a hell of a lot more to life than just music. And in some ways, I feel like if I hadn't done that, I would have lost my music. I know so many guys who are professional musicians who it's like the last thing they want to do is music in a way, you know what I mean? Like they're kind of stuck in a world that doesn't really allow them to be real musicians. I remember at one point when I was doing the commercial work, some guy who I knew was a keyboard player in one of the pits in Broadway. I think it was for Cats. And he was looking for a substitute keyboard player. And I sat in there a few times and just like got the feeling for what's going on there. And it was so freaking dismal. These really, good musicians, but there was something about it that feeling of it was so dead, And I realized, you know what? Because I treated it like a religion, I guess. So I wasn't willing to be sacrilegious.
Yeah, it's really,
and I had to get out of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And this gets to the abstraction thing. When I started to see the world of music was becoming the opposite of what I had hoped it would be. It seemed initially as this potential for redemption, but now it looked more and more like it was like seducing people into these fake worlds, And those are the terms that I see much of what I loved as a kid nowadays, even some of the stuff that I still love today. I feel like, I'm not sure if this really did us any favors. So this whole, like, Are you familiar with the book, The Society of the Spectacle?
No, I'm not.
By Guy Debord? That's a really interesting book. I think it's great to get some of the left-wing intellectuals mixed into the thing too. And he's definitely kind of like a post-Marxist cultural critic type of guy who points out the consequences of what happens in a society where the fixation is on these spectacular representations instead of the kind of nuts and bolts of life. And I think that very much, that the computer is just kind of turbocharged that whole thing. And now these kind of simulations are real, the virtual reality, the reality TV show, has now been like packaged and turned into this like realm of all potential that people could go just live in. And that resonates with the concept of the abomination of desolation, which is a biblical reference to the visions that happen in Daniel, where he's shown this picture of what happens in the future. And it's a prophetic kind of poetry talking about the establishment of the abomination of desolation, which basically means the removal of the soul.
Wow.
And so the inhabiting of these abstracted realms is the process by which people are desolated.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, that you mentioned, but we were speaking about music, and I still think it's really brave of you to pick up and move and stuff like that, and reinvent yourself. I think a lot of people are afraid of taking that first step. Do you think there was a guiding principle that gave you some sort of level of confidence in doing that, something that dramatic? Or where did you say you got the courage to do something like that? Where do you think it came from?
Well, I think part of it was desperation. Part of it was kind of
motivating.
Yeah, desperation is a real motivator. You kind of, sometimes you really do have to hit a kind of bottom before you can really make a change. Part of it was my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, but we ended up getting married, and she really kind of threw down an ultimatum, and that got me going. And part of it was like the recognition that I needed to find some fundamental principles, and that I was not going to be able to do that where I was, that no matter what I did, I would kind of end up doing the same thing just because of its environmental. There's only so much you can change when you're in the same environment. So I think those are the things that added up. And I'll tell you, it was not easy. It was really disorienting at times and incredibly trying. There's some very, very difficult stretches and dark periods where it just seemed like I had no idea what I was doing.
Right now, I have a better idea of what that time period was like. So that was your I call it the Dante's Inferno. Like, we all go through this,
yeah.
Right? It's I've been there too. I used to work in aviation for a couple of years, and then I quit and had to rebuild my life, and it was hell. Okay, because I went from something comfortable to something unpredictable. And and I had no choice. I was in a position where it was do or die. So it's it's just fascinating, because we have obviously very different people, but you can always find common ground with even people with dramatically different upbringings and backgrounds. So I definitely relate.
Yeah, it's amazing the extent to which background is sort of incidental now. In many ways, I'd say we've had very similar experiences.
Yeah, I'd say the main difference was our perspective on music, because, and it's amazing. It really is amazing. So you could say that you were musically privileged, and then it wasn't as much of a natural gift and type of I mean that like as a gift given to you. It wasn't because there's so much conversations about privilege, right? So you're by all means were grown up in a musically privileged family, and I grew up in the complete opposite. So for you, it was actually more of a challenge, you know, because you had to fight against that and to really learn who you were. And for me, I had to fight to play music because my parents are, you know, conservative and nobody plays music. Well, I'm the first generation, and they're not going to want me to play music. So there's this like, hey, you should be a doctor, right? That's what every Pakistani Indian family would say to their first generation children. So, and here I am, like thinking I'm a punk rocker and dyeing my hair, and they're like, "What is going on? Like, what is happening?" They're just like, "You're not playing music. No, don't do it." And I was like, "Screw that. I'm never gonna stop." And then that obviously benefited me, right? Because I was defining myself in defiance and against the grain. So this idea of privilege is really funny because I think we literally just shattered the idea of privilege in some respects, right? Because there's nepotism, but I think sometimes being born in wealth can be like a cage, you know. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to just be the golden road to where you want to be, unless that's, if you want false admiration, sure, then, you know, I think we still feel that when we look at skeevy rich children who are just like, you know, like the Kardashians or something. They just inherit wealth, and then we're supposed to celebrate them.
Ugh.
I think we had similar experiences, but found them in very different ways. You know, it's just really, I think it's a good example on not tokenizing and not simplifying, because whenever you simplify, you also squeeze out the uniqueness of life itself. And it goes back to, you know, a lot of what we said about conformity. And you know, conformity is a very like black and white thing. And obviously, just by talking, you know, me and you can see that it's way more complex. And the things that we assume are not always what they assume. Because look at you grew up a family of music lovers, and that type of privilege was actually a challenge, you know, in some ways.
Well, here's the interesting thing. My father always said that you should always play music, but you shouldn't do it as a profession. He was like, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. That was the pressure.
Wait, are you Indian? You know, that's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my ancestry is Jewish, so there is a kind of
stability, man.
That traditional approach. You said your family's from Pakistan, right?
Well, my father is. My mom's Indian, so they committed the mortal sin. Yeah.
Right. But, you know, prior to the English, India and Pakistan were one country, basically. So
sure,
it's really
good luck trying to tell them that.
That's a whole other. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
But hey,
shit.
You know,
so that must have been something else for them too. Like they were really making a rather strong statement there themselves. Was your mother Hindu?
She was actually Christian.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is not as, you know, there are a lot of Christians in India, you know. India is religiously, India has no religion. It's kind of it's always been a place of many people. And, you know, I think even the word Hindustan never used to imply a religion. And I'm going to mess it up. I won't even try to actually tell you the real meaning, but Hindustan refers to geography. It's like something to do with land and water. So it's always been a place of many, many types of people and relatively getting along. But yeah, you know, my mom was Christian, and that was obviously a big deal because my dad is Muslim, and my dad's family was really not thrilled, and that was always a challenge growing up. You know, here I am in between two identities, and but I grew up very privileged, and you know, the way that I see it because of my father. Like to be that courageous and forward thinking, and you know, he's so, I'm not going to throw my mom under the bus. She's the reason why his family loved our family is because of how committed she was towards proving them wrong. despite the fact that that's insulting. If you have any, she had to be egoless and kind of operate on a divine. I call it like a divine love, right? When you forego your ego and you can still love someone who doesn't love you.
Prem.
She so that's the kind of woman she is. I grew up with two amazing parents, and that's like hitting the jackpot. No matter the income, race, whatever. If you have two parents that love each other, and forget it. That is, I think, the true privilege in life, because all things it really stems from parents.
I completely agree. That's a perfect example, because that's completely not the situation with my parents. They did not manage to stay together. Their relationship was very problematic, I think, from the beginning. I honestly think that they were early adopters of a kind of society of the spectacle.
What do you mean by that?
I think they identified with cultural icons. My sense was always that my mom was trying to be Jackie O and my dad was trying to be Cary Grant. And it just didn't work. They were sort of pretending to be people who they weren't really. They never really got to know each other. And they both, tragically ended up sort of repeating similarly failed relationships later in life with other people. And the family got broke up as a consequence. And it was kind of a big mess and a tragedy, ultimately.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. But, my dad had some business success. So from a lot of people's perspective, we would be a very privileged family, but it was really not a happy family. And there were a lot of negative consequences to all that, I think a lot of people don't recognize that money is not a positive influence at a certain point. I think it's good to have what you need and maybe a little bit more, but once you get into the upper middle class, people start making decisions that are really stupid because they can.
Yeah. It's, that saying, when there's no dragons left to slay, you invent them, you look for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you just do arbitrary stuff, or like, instead of having to work things out with your spouse, you just decide, well, screw it. I can afford to live without this person,
Right.
Doesn't matter. I can just
non-confrontation becomes easier. It just becomes so accessible to walk away rather than stay and work.
Yeah, and so you never really have to confront anything. I think a lot of rich people, they just buy their way from one situation into another, and they never really have to come face to face with reality. And that's a true tragedy.
It's like living in your own cage,
Mm-hmm.
That's, to me, it's like it's really like living in a mental cage.
Absolutely.
And I think there's so your parents they divorced. How old were you at that time?
I was 13.
Okay, so relatively young,
Yeah.
And do you think that that has been a source of informing? I mean, it has to be a huge source of informing your journey. And
oh yeah,
it makes sense. It makes sense that you're still kind of you reconstructed yourself in some ways.
It took forever for me to get to the point where I could even entertain the possibility of really committing myself to a relationship. I had a string of relationships that I could not commit myself to.
Sure.
And
I could see that.
And that was bad, So yeah, it's been a rocky road, but I've definitely tried to learn and make better decisions as time's gone on. So that kind of gets back to that whole thing of people not being allowed now to explore and make mistakes. You can't expect people to grow that way. It's always going to be a mess. Life is a messy thing.
Well, I say I'm like I grew up rebellious, like punk culture in New York. So my whole idea of that is screw them, like It goes back to my non.
That's the other thing we have in common is CBGBs.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of gigs at CBs back in the day.
Yeah, I'm kind of like a dinosaur of New York.
Uh-huh.
In a lot of ways, I've kept a low profile, man. You know, if the amount of things if you look up like my musical background, I don't really. I should say I like being a private person, but yeah, there's a lot of stories there with the New York New York City music scene, and I've seen it evolve. You know, I would call it the generations of it, seeing the evolutions from the Lower East Side to Brooklyn before Brooklyn became revitalized.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when CB's closed. It just seemed like, holy shit, I didn't think that was possible.
Yeah, I think that was the first time that I realized that there was a shift. Like, oh, okay. I was naive when I was young about things like that. I didn't know like what gentrification or things like that. I didn't know what that meant. I just thought things would always be there. It was actually, I've been into so many places where I didn't bother looking at the name. That was the kind of naive thinking. It's like, oh, that place on the corner, it'll be there. I don't need to bother.
Right.
Now you take photos of places when you like them and you're like, wow, you kind of idolize a place. For me, CBGB's was like kind of like that. I thought it would just always be there, you know, and it was always that place that had like punks outside. It was just there. But then when that closed, I really started to realize like, oh, there's capital forces, and, you know, kind of opened my eyes to that perspective of New York's of inevitable, like massive, you know, change that was about to come. It always surprised me up until maybe like 2 years ago. I've seen enough of things not being holy, especially in Brooklyn, because I feel like the level of change that happened in Manhattan in the 90s pales in comparison to the level of change that's happening in Brooklyn. And it's almost like a hyper active yearly, instead of 10 years, it's like now every year. You have to count who's open, you know?
So do you want to tell me a little bit about what you see happening in the city now? Kind of, you know, I've gotten a lot of mixed messages about what New York is like now, whether it's sort of dying or if it's revitalizing. And what do you think? What's your overall feeling of what's going on in the city?
Yeah, look, New York City is, I mean, with COVID, we really got an eye opener on like how what we thought were the most progressive and forward beacons of like the country, you know, like how bad California and New York in some ways, and in different ways, I should say, handled this type of era that we were in with COVID. And, you know, but New York is like, it's just really gridlocked. That's what it feels like. Like it's incompetence on the political level. It's just to me exposing really old types of political corruption, you know, because, you know, with Cuomo and Blasio, he's like a mob boss, man.
Yeah, I mean, Cuomo is just like what a
he's like a mob boss from the past. But,
totally.
That kind of culture is kind of still in New York politics. If you believe it or not, there is this type of like, you know, just stealing political office and then holding ground for like your benefit or something. All the types of like, you know, I guess whatever, I don't want to call it conspiratorial, but like these kind of machinations of like what you hear about with dark politicians and you know, like that kind of stuff is, it's becoming more obvious, and it's like turning on the lights and seeing the rats scatter. You know, I feel like that's what's happening in New York. Is like, it's like someone turned on the lights, and, you know, for the city that never sleeps, and you're just seeing a lot of these types of systems that are decaying. You know, I would say Brooklyn is doing better than.
So it seems like a real opportunity. It seems like a moment of opportunity to really clean it up.
It's a huge opportunity.
You know, the gridlock and the inertia, and it's hard to say like, But do you think like someone like Andrew Yang would do a good job? Do you think he has a chance of actually winning?
Yeah, whether he has a chance of doing a good job is different than whether he has a chance of winning. I think he definitely has a chance of winning. It just seems like the era is primed for someone like him. You know, he would have been unimaginable maybe just a couple years ago. He would have been another Bernie, right? Like someone who has all these great ideas but just can't carry it over the finish line because of the old system having such staying power. And but I think with COVID, it's definitely collapsed a lot of these types of norms, and I think he stands a better chance, I think, than traditionally. Whether he'll do a better job is a completely different story, because I find that I don't know a single politician who's in reality, because to be a politician in reality, you have to have a deep connection to yourself and your soul. And to me, when you have a connection to even source, I call it source, because if you don't believe in God, then you have to believe in source, because it's all around you. Everything's animated, and no one had to push a button to turn it on. And so you have connection to source, and you're not abstracted into the algorithm and the matrix, right? That's what people call it. Then you could be the person for the time. And I think he has good ideas, but I'm afraid that, he is going to be like any other person who's abstracted into the desires of getting elected and the, self-delusion.
Yep. He's kind of already proven himself to be like that, taking the job with CNN after the whole run, and some of his willingness to play ball with the Democratic establishment just doesn't smell good,
Yeah, that's a tough one to say, because, I'm always, I know there's people who can be very cutthroat, and it's almost like if you've had no experience dealing with power, then you can take your ball and cry and run away and say, wow, you did this one thing and I hate you and I don't trust you. And I get it. Trust me, being a New Yorker and cynicism, they go hand in hand, but I try to not to be as much of like a hard-lined extremist. It's like, I'm just looking for ideas that aren't just superficial, I really want politicians to start speaking to people like they're a little bit more intelligent, because if we keep appealing to the lowest common denominator, then we get what we deserve, right? That's what George Carlin, his brilliant skit was all about, shit in, shit out.
It's very true. Well, in some ways, that's a condemnation of democracy, and there have been a number of interesting critics now who are kind of reassessing whether or not democracy is actually a functional political system. But yeah, it does seem to be the case that if you have to somehow or another appeal to the common voter, then if the citizenry isn't highly educated and engaged, then by necessity, the politicians are going to kind of degenerate into these hawkers of oversimplified, completely unrealistic statements that just appeal to people's emotions. So they just become they're just like celebrity manipulators. There's a great passage in the Society of the Spectacle, which I'll send you a link to, a really great free translation online. It's better than the translations that I've seen in books. That talks about what the characteristics are of celebrity, and they say that celebrities are people who represent the potential of consumer, like the realization of the idealized consumer, and that they are the purveyors of the seemingly lived. So that fundamentally celebrities live a life of greater poverty than the rest of us, even though we're all kind of also caught up in this poverty-stricken, abstracted simulation type of way of living. it's a pretty dark book in a lot of ways, but it's very well written and really interesting critique.
Hey, you need a little bit of darkness to see the light.
Absolutely.
I think.
Well, that is a perfect statement to bring this to a close, because I think we could easily talk for another hour. That was a great conversation, man.
Yeah, we could clearly keep talking all day. Yeah, likewise. I mean, that's a great sign of the meeting of minds, and hopefully it was enough for your audience to not be overwhelmed. I know this is heady stuff, but hey, it's Sunday.
Yeah, right.
Kick back. Get back and enjoy the heady combo.
Yeah, well, they'll listen on whatever day they happen to download the episode. But I think that anyone who's still downloading my material is used to a pretty heady trip. So I think they'll be happy.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'll.
It's great talking to you.
Yeah. Anytime you want to come back on, feel free to drop me a line, and we'll set up another time.
There's so much left to be said, so
no doubt.
I would love to come back.
Yeah, and anything that crosses your radar that you think is interesting that I should know about, I hope you keep that in mind, and send me whatever links or anything like that you want me to include in the show notes, and I'll post that up there too.
I mean, people can go to NadeemGibranSalaam.com, and that's really the best place to learn anything about me, but I'll send you links too.
All right, perfect. All right, brother, you take care. Best of luck.
You too, man.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We look forward to serving you again soon. In the meantime, remember, turn that thing over a few times before you pick it up and take it home.